The Politics Lowdown went on location earlier this month at the annual conference of the Public Affairs Research Council. Along with our friends at Covalent Logic, we co-sponsored something called PAR Talks. Yep, they're kind of like TED Talks, but these PAR Talks were delivered by 4 of the youngest members of the Louisiana legislature, all aged 40 or under. Where do they think the state is headed? What do they think about the political landscape? How can you make a difference? Well, you're going to find out that and much more in our 4-part series on this year's PAR Talks. And it starts right now on the Politics Lowdown, your source for the best and the worst in Louisiana politics. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Covalent Logic, a communications firm that passionately pursues strategic ideas in graphic design, web development, and public relations. CovalentLogic.com. Here's your lowdown. Meet Edward Clark James II. He's the representative from House District 101 in Baton Rouge, but everyone just calls him Ted. He's an attorney, he's 36 years old, and he just welcomed a baby daughter to the world. So here's Ted giving what you could call a TED Talk. It focuses on the meaning of failure, assumptions about race, and the need for more compassion in everything we do.
For those of you who don't know me, I am a native of Baton Rouge. How many Baton Rouge natives do we have? I am a product of brick. I grew up playing soccer, so I learned teamwork on the fields of brick. I went to middle school at McKinley Middle. We had no sports teams at the time, so I wanted to play football. So I joined a football team, the South Baton Rouge Rams, and we lost every single game except the last game. So I learned humility, and I learned defeat on brick football fields. And then as a high school student, I played in the marching band at McKinley High School, and I think that's where I learned leadership as one of the leaders in the marching band. I always ask when I first got elected, my colleagues, what brought you here? And to some, it was some unfortunate event, something in business, something happening in the community. And for me, I knew at a very young age that I would be here. When I was in the second grade, 1988 was a presidential election, and we had a mock election. I went to South Boulevard Elementary, now Flame. And I rushed home, and my parents asked me how the day go, and I told them I voted today. And my parents said, well, who'd you vote for? I said, well, I voted for George Bush. And my parents, being Democrats, like, why did you vote for George Bush? And I told them, I said, the other guy was too short. He just didn't look presidential to me. So my parents, they laughed similarly to you guys, but they started to really talk to me about being informed about issues. I further learned that George Bush and I shared the same birthday, June 12th. So we started to have these discussions at a very young age, and I think from the 4th grade until I graduated law school, I ran for something. 4-H, student government, had a very crushing defeat when I was in undergrad at Southern. I thought that I was this cool, popular kid, and I only talked to members of the football team, I talked to the members of Southern University's marching band, and I talked to the people in my dorm. And I thought because I was a cool kid that everybody liked that I was going to win that election, and I got creamed. I lost by 363 votes to Stephen Sumner, and it still burns me to this day. And Stephen and I went to law school, and we were classmates, and I tried to encourage him to run for SBA president because I wanted another shot at it. So I ran for SBA president, and I won by 2 votes. 2 votes. And that taught me the importance of having the wherewithal to not ignore anybody. And I did not have that wherewithal as an undergrad student, and that humility lesson continues to be one that pops up for me, and being reminded of the obligation that I have to be thoughtful. And what I want to talk to you guys about today is the future of the legislature focusing on our sense of compassion. I had no idea what I was going to talk to you guys about. I asked John yesterday, I was like, man, what you talking about? And he brought up something to me, and I was already kind of thinking in the lines of what he talked about. And John and I, we share a lot in common, being younger members of the legislature, and we're both lawyers. And I think lawyers, we're trained to see both sides of issues. And compassion for our clients is something that's there. And John, he started to talk about me as an African-American member of the legislature. And I'll tell you that when Robert first called me, it was during the special session, so I was angry, right? We were fussing and fighting. And then on last week, and I'm not gonna go deeply in it, but last week we had all of the Alton Sterling things come back up with the Attorney General's announcement, and then with the announcement from our police chief that an officer was going to be fired and one suspended. So all these emotions started to come up. So I was angry again, right? But also I started to kind of think about the compassion, because there have been some in our community that have criticized the chief for his remarks on both sides. Because I think Chief tried to walk a fine line. And even for the officers' families, he talked about the compassion for those officers, and we have to have that because two families were greatly impacted and lives drastically changed. And then we had this moment on Wednesday where we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I'm sitting at my desk, and again, in the Black Caucus, we had a resolution, we were gonna go up, and I'm sitting there and I get a visit at my desk from Nancy Landry. Nancy is a Republican from Lafayette, and Nancy said, I know you're gonna do a resolution, but I think you should wait and do it at 6:01. And I was shocked. I was shocked that Nancy knew that. And 6:01 was the exact time when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and when Nancy walked back, I started to think about my shock, and I realized that in that moment, I had the same bias that I sometimes criticize people for having. Because I was shocked that Nancy knew that, and I was shocked that she had the compassion enough to come up to me and say, I think that we should do it at an appropriate time. And as I stood there, we had members to recite words. We had one of our members who had the opportunity to meet Dr. King. He spoke, and when it was time for me to speak, I looked around, and it wasn't just the Black Caucus. Almost 90% of the legislature, we stood side by side. And in that moment, and I think that many of us shared it, it was probably one of my proudest moments there, because we stood there, and one of the big things about Dr. King, he talked about justice, he talked about civility, but wrapped up in all of that is a sense of what I believe compassion. And a lot of times I'll tell you that I am challenged in being a legislator and being frustrated that sometimes my compassion might not be mirrored in other members. And then I'm reminded that their compassion just shows in a different way. And I used to say common sense isn't common at the legislature. I used to say that a lot in my first term as a speaker. I used to say common sense just isn't common. And now I recognize that what's common to me isn't common to you. And what's common to John isn't common to Helena. But what we all share, because we pray before every session, so we all know about compassion. And in the future, I want us to be more compassionate in our policy making, and I'll talk about a couple of areas. We did a massive amount of bills, and we made some drastic strides last year in the name of criminal justice reform. And in that had to be an element of compassion, because we have those that are traditionally tough on crime, and we decided to be smart on crime. And we had to recognize that although we have some individuals that make some terrible mistakes, we also have to be compassionate enough to give those same individuals a second chance. 2 weeks ago, I was talking with one of the inmates that works in the Capitol, and I asked him, I was like, how much do you guys need? He said, nothing. And that shocked me. And one of them told me that he has been on the list to go to work release. And those prisoners on work release, they get, below minimum wage, but a substantial amount for someone who's incarcerated. And those dollars can go towards, they go towards the commissary, they go towards restitution if they have restitution. And I started to think about the guys that are in the Capitol, and sometimes they just walk past us and we don't even know their names. We don't know where they're from. So I filed a bill to try to increase that compensation. And the first thing that I know folks think about, why are we trying to pay prisoners, right? But for me, when I think back to criminal justice reform, we did a lot to push folks out of prison, and then they stepped out with nothing. Some of them didn't have a family to go to. Some of them didn't have enough money to get a bus pass back to wherever the few members of their family are. And I thought about it in the ones that are working with us, and if they have rehabilitated themselves enough to be in the people's house and stand there and clean up after us and help us, and they bring food in and out of committees, they carry bags for folks, they push carts around, then we can do a little bit more to show a slight bit of compassion to help them once they leave and enter into society. Because if they leave with a few dollars, if they leave with some sense of dignity, it helps them on their road to not end up back in the same situation that they left. On yesterday, we had a bill that passed the House floor. It was watered down a little bit for a syringe, a needle exchange program for those that are addicted to heroin. And when I thought about it the first time, the guys asked me to grab it, I was like, there's no way I'm bringing that bill. But then I started to look at the research behind these programs and how successful they have been with reducing opioid deaths, reducing overdoses, helping folks to reach the type of treatment that they need. Then I had to lean back to my compassion. I had to lean back to the compassion for those individuals to be able to help them even a small step of the way. And what the concern we kept hearing from law enforcement, we kept hearing, oh, what happens to law enforcement if we give these folks a free pass, if we're allowing folks to just ride around with needles, and we're saying that law enforcement can arrest them. In committee, not one person from law enforcement testified against the bill, but we have other members, again, from their experiences and their diversity. And when Tony Bacala came, I knew he was trying to gut my bill. I knew it when I saw him. And Tony's experiences are vastly different from mine and Sheriff Pilot, because I've watched these things from one side with families, but they have been on the other side. Tony has been a law enforcement officer who was fearful of patting down somebody without fear of being stuck by one of these nasty needles. And Sheriff Pilot had to run a prison with many of the folks in his prison that had gone through some of the same similar incidents. Some successfully rehabilitated themselves, some not. So although I was angry, because when I saw Tony coming, I knew it wasn't a friendly amendment, but they had a different perspective. And they had a different sense of how do we move from where we are today to a brighter day in Louisiana. And I think that for the future, we have to recognize, just like we did on Wednesday, that we share so much more in common when we rely on our compassion. And as we move forward, especially for you students, I know many of you are probably interested, most of your questions are probably going to be about TOPS. For you parents, some of your questions are probably going to be about TOPS. And when we debate these issues, our compassion for you, for your education, should match that same compassion for not only our young people that are exiting high school, but our young people that are leaving our prison. Because if we don't prepare and if we don't do small things to help those students, not those prisoners as they exit, they're not going to end up going back to school. They're going to end up going back to prison. And it's going to cost us 3 times the amount to take care of them and house them and feed them and give them medicine in prison as it would if they decided to follow the bright future of these young people. And
you're
for me, I'm wrapping up. for me, and for each one of you, my charge is that you allow your compassion to lead you in your decision making. Thank you.
That was State Representative Ted James at the annual conference of the Public Affairs Research Council. Want to learn more about PAR? Visit parlouisiana.org. Want more from Ted James? Go to our website, lapolitics.com, to watch this post-presentation Q&A conducted by PAR President Robert Travis Scott. This has been your fix from the La Politics Lowdown and the Public Affairs Research Council. Make sure to tune back in next week for our next installment featuring Representative Julie Emerson, the legislature's youngest member. And with that, we bid you farewell from the La Politics Lowdown, a product of Louisiana, where all the donors are wealthy, all the reporters are unbiased, and all the politicians are honest. And now a word from our sponsor.
I always start with what are you trying to say and who are you trying to say it to? Because communication is a two-way street. Whether it's advertising, marketing, public relations, web design, graphic design, it doesn't matter. The point is that you have a point of view that you are trying to express. It could be my product is awesome, my service is awesome, that I have this thing that you want. So we always try to identify who are the audiences, what drives them, what motivates them, what do they care about? Do they care about price? Do they care about time? Do they care about quality? It has to be an authentic message that will resonate with the audience. So we always start from what's the message, who's the audience, and then we get into what media are we going to use to share the message.